Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins, and I was the Green Party candidate for president and also the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And I'm getting my notes corrected here. And this program, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program that we ran on in 2020. So I want to start today by calling your attention to a statement that the Ukraine Solidarity Network just issued called Free the Children: End the Starvation and Genocide in Ukraine, Gaza, and Sudan. And we'll put the link to that in the text, in the chat. Tomorrow, June 1st, is Children's Day in Ukraine and Russia and 47 other countries. It's June 8th in the United States. It's in April in Palestine, but most countries, the largest number of countries, celebrate it tomorrow. So that's why we put the statement out. There are demonstrations in London and several European cities and even Freeport, Maine, calling attention to, in the case of Ukraine, the tens of thousands of stolen children that have been stolen from Ukraine and relocated to Russia. And as you probably know, the International Criminal Court has arrest warrants out for President Vladimir Putin and his children's minister, Maria Lvova-Belova, for the genocidal crimes of stealing these children. And Ukraine has documented, they got good documentation for nearly 20,000 of these children. There was a program at Yale that the Trump administration cut the funding for that had data on about 35,000. And Yale had capacities that Ukraine didn't, to scour open source intelligence. And that's basically stuff online. Anybody can find, it's not secret. And satellite imagery. And they were able to, find and track more of these children, up to about 35,000, and locate the re-education camps where Ukrainian children are being Russified and militarized and prepared to fight their own country when they come of age, and some have. Now, Russia itself claims 700,000 children have been taken to Russia. And that's probably true because most of the children haven't been separated from their families. They went with their mothers when they were forcibly transferred from the occupied territories into Russia. So even those children are going under a lot of trauma. Now, I was on a Zoom call yesterday that the European Network in solidarity with Ukraine had with Ukrainian human rights lawyers and researchers who talked about how they're documenting these Russian war crimes and crimes against humanity about these children. And I think the most poignant comment came from Alexandra Matvichuk, who is the Ukrainian lawyer who heads the Center for Civil Liberties in Ukraine, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. And Alexandra said, childhood has an expiration date. And, that was to say we have to move fast to save these children from the trauma and permanent damage they're undergoing as a result of their abductions and indoctrination under in these education camps or re-education camps. And so, any peace deal that's got any justice in it is going to include the return of these children to Ukraine. So that was Ukraine, but while Ukraine took it upon itself in the Ukraine Solidarity Movement to talk about the children that Russia has abducted, Ukraine Solidarity Network felt we had to also acknowledge what's going on in Gaza and Sudan. And of course, in Gaza, the genocide is accelerating with Israel's, starvation of the Gazans and accelerated bombardment and occupation of Gaza. You may have all seen that terrifying video of that little girl with a ponytail. You could just see her silhouette against the fire trying to escape a building that was set on fire by bombardment, and she died. And I have to tell you, man, that's sticking in my mind like that iconic picture of that Vietnamese girl running naked after the napalm bombing. Except that Vietnamese girl survived. She's alive. Her name's Phan T. Kim Fuck. And that Palestinian girl was burned alive and died. And I tell you, man, I've had nightmares since seeing that. It's just a horrifying image, and it encapsulates what's going on in Gaza, which is just unspeakable. And, you know, what's terrible to realize also is that the majority of Israelis support the expulsion of the Palestinians from Gaza, and almost half of them want to just exterminate the Gazans. Charles Keener posted in the chat a link to an article about a survey that was done. It turns out it was done in April, and it found 82% of Israelis want to expel all the Palestinians from Gaza, and 47% want to kill every man, woman, and child in Gaza. So forced transfers and, of course, mass extermination are both crimes of genocide under the Geneva Convention on Genocide. And that survey, it was originally discussed in an article in Haaretz, and we'll put the link to that article in. It came out in English this week. Last week it was out just in Hebrew. And it's behind a paywall, so you might have trouble accessing it. So we'll also put a link to another article by one of the authors of that Haaretz article. And this article was posted 2 months ago, and it didn't get the attention that the Haaretz article did, but it covers much the same ground, including reporting on that survey and discussing how support for genocide in Gaza or of the Palestinians in Israeli society has grown from being on the margins to being the mainstream. And all that's to say, it shows why the world, and the U.S. is the key country, has to impose an arms embargo and end the diplomatic cover for Israel in order to force it to change and respect Palestinian rights. Now, more than ever, we're hearing from Western European countries, France and Germany, talking about cutting off arms to Israel. Chancellor Merz said that yesterday for the first time in Germany. France and the Arab states are pushing the UN to get serious about forcing serious negotiations toward a two-state solution with deadlines to get it done. You know, we've heard this talk before, but it seems to be getting stronger. But the U.S. is key because we provide the most arms. We're the most powerful country. We provide the diplomatic cover for Israel. And right now, Trump isn't going to do anything. We could get Congress to force a change, but, as I pointed out on this podcast, Bernie Sanders got resolutions voted on to cut off offensive weapons to Israel back in the late fall. And it was for various categories of offensive weapons, and the votes were between 15 and 17 senators. He did it again in March, and he only got 15 senators. So we're about 30%, because we need a majority. But, we only got 15% in the Senate willing to impose an arms embargo to stop the genocide. They haven't had a vote in the House. I pointed out maybe it was last week, there's a bill that Rashida Tlaib and Pramila Jayapal have put in the House to vote to stop offensive weapons to Israel. Of course, Speaker Johnson isn't going to make that happen. They could attach it to another bill, although I don't know what bill they're going to do it because the Republicans aren't legislating. But the point I'm making is that we have our work cut out for us because, in the polls, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but yeah, I can remember them. Right after the war in Gaza broke out, 52% of Americans were already saying we got to stop sending arms to Israel. And then I think it was in April 2024, that was up to 60%. In another poll in June, it was up to 61%. Those are all done by CBS. I haven't seen a poll asking that question since that time, which is an indictment of our media because they're just not making this an issue. But the point is, the American people are ready for an arms embargo of Israel, and the politicians aren't. And that's, the big problem we've got in our country. Public opinion doesn't translate into public policy, which is an indictment of the limits of our democracy. So anyway, this is just a tragic, terrible thing that, we got to keep speaking out on and just keep pushing. Although the people of Gaza are running out of time. They're starving, and their plans, the U.S. is involved and to deport them to countries like, they talked about Libya. That's the one I remember. There's a couple other countries. Rwanda. It's insane. So we just got to keep speaking up and doing what we can. And then Sudan, as bad as the death and destruction in Gaza and Ukraine have been, the scale of death and destruction is even greater in Sudan as a result of that idiotic, stupid civil war between two factions of the military. 25 million people are short of food in Gaza right now. About half the population has been displaced by the war, like 12, 13 million. And then the World Food Program, which was feeding some of these people, about 3 million, not even close to the need, but that's what they were doing last year. Now the U.S., defunded U.S. aid and stopped contributing to the World Food Program, and the U.S. was providing half the funds last year, which, the U.S. could provide all the funds. I mean, this is a tiny fraction. It's like $5 billion. We got a military budget of $1 trillion. So it's nothing for us. And, what about the rest of the world, the rich world that could provide this funds for the World Food Program to feed starving people? But, the U.S. cut that off. World Food Program is in a financial crisis. They can't help these people in Sudan. So we got to demand that the U.S. and the international community fully fund the World Food Program to stop this famine in Sudan and other, there are other hungry areas in the world. So take a look at that statement. It provides a lot more facts and figures than I just did. But, tomorrow's Children's Day, and we wanted people to think and act to help save the children. Another atrocity going on is Trump's nativist, racist, anti-immigration program. It's just one atrocity after another. It was yesterday or maybe Thursday, the State Department formed an Office of Remigration. Now, the term remigration comes from the European fascists. It's a term for ethnic cleansing, deporting all the non-white people in Europe. And it's these people that have this ridiculous great replacement theory that people of color are replacing the white people. And, it's straight fascism. And our State Department has adopted that terminology, normalizing it. And now the State Department, instead of facilitating the process for refugees and asylum seekers and legal immigrants, is now becoming an arm of the mass deportation program of Trump, led by ICE and Homeland Security. So, you wonder how it could get worse. Well, it did. The Supreme Court just had a ruling, not a decision with an opinion, but just an emergency ruling saying that about 500,000 Haitians, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, and Guatemalans no longer have this temporary status, this parole status. They were granted under the Trump administration to stay here. So, they weren't deported back to these terrible situations they came from. And although the Ukrainians, of which there are 250,000 refugees in the U.S. now, haven't been targeted or haven't been targeted by the Trump administration says we're going to get to them. In other words, they're going to make a decision. And, so the Ukrainian refugees here are freaking out. There was a dissent written by Ketanji Brown Jackson and co-signed by Sonia Sotomayor, objecting to this ending of the, protected status for these refugees. The case is not over because there are other cases related to this moving through the courts. So it is going to come back to the Supreme Court and probably get full hearings and a written decision. But this is not a good sign that this Supreme Court respects the rights of non-citizens people who have come to this country, whether they're here with documents or not. And that's going to take months for that to, at least for that to work its way through the courts. And right now, hundreds of thousands of people are in immediate crisis. They're losing their jobs, their bank accounts, and facing deportation. It's a desperate situation. So I'll just call attention to one more insane thing going on, and then we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. And that's this attack on higher education. The attack on Harvard is just the tip of the iceberg. Trump and the MAGA Republicans are going after higher education and science itself because these fascists want us to be ignorant and stupid so they can do what they want. And if they crush Harvard, which is a hugely powerful institution embedded in the American establishment and, you know, the owning rich classes, if they can crush Harvard, they can crush any university. And in a way, this is worse than the McCarthy era because they're not just going after the left. They're going after education and science itself. And one of the consequences is Trump is instigating a brain drain, not just trying to keep international students out, for which there was a temporary restraining order from a court this week, but they're chasing American students and scholars abroad. And so they are so far succeeding in their effort to make us stupid and ignorant, and we just can't be. So this is a fight that we also have to win. So I'll stop there and look for your comments and questions. Somebody said the links didn't work. Which link? Because I'll try to dig it up and get it back to you. Jay Walker, am I coming to Harrisburg next week? What's going on in Harrisburg? I have not heard anything about that. Andrew Hager, Dr. Brainworm, RFK Jr., has struck again. He's junked research into HIV/AIDS vaccines. Geez, I hadn't heard that. I know USA cut off providing, HIV/AIDS medicines, which is having a devastating impact in Africa, particularly South Africa, and in Ukraine, which has had a high HIV/AIDS rate. And now people cannot keep the virus under control, and they're getting sick and dying. You know, thank Donald Trump for that, and his what I don't know what to call, Marco Rubio. He's just a spineless yes man to a man that insulted him during the presidential debates. And when was that, 2020 or was it 2016? Anyway, Marco Rubio he needs to look for his spine. Does the U.S. stand a chance against what could very well become the next pandemic? Well, we still have access here for people who have insurance to HIV vaccines here in the United States. The problem is around the world where, this is the one good thing that George W. Bush did. He got the patents that were making HIV/AIDS medicine impossible for people in Africa to get. That's what he focused on and brought the prices down. So people were getting the medicine until Trump. And so I don't know if this is going to, the research, needs to continue because the virus evolves and we can find out new stuff. So, but I'm not sure we're facing an HIV epidemic in this country as long as the medicine is still available that we have. Okay, the Ukraine link didn't work. Let me look at that. I'm trying it myself. It worked for me. Why don't you try it again, or maybe cut and paste it into your browser? So Ukraine Solidarity Network statement. I got to it. So I think try it again. Oh, I see what happened is in one of the uh, postings, the URL bleeded over to a second entry. So um, yeah, you should be able to find it if you paste the whole link into your browser. Jack Lucas, prominent Dems like Ruben Gallego and Newsom, the governor of California, continue to turn their backs on trans people. This would be a big opening for Greens if we didn't approach trans issues like it's a fringe topic. Are we? Because I think the Greens have been very good on the trans issue. I mean, we did have some so-called TERFs, trans exclusive radical feminists, try to change our policies, but they were roundly rejected. The Georgia Green Party, Georgia U.S. Green Party, took an anti-trans position, and it was so egregious they were expelled from the National Party. So I think actually the Greens have been pretty good. Now, that doesn't mean in some places there may be resistance to being, unapologetically for trans equal rights, but I don't think that's been a problem for us, unless you can point me to an example we need to address. Jay Walker, Howie, can you tell us about the Rochester candidate and about local organizing there and in Syracuse? Yeah, the Rochester candidate, I'm blanking on his name. I know him really well. He's a longtime Green, a good candidate. He's running for city council. I don't know about the local organizing there, except they do have a local that meets, and I just don't have a good take on their, how the campaign is going. And in Syracuse, the local's been dormant. I mean, I think I confessed this on a previous podcast, but I got pulled out of Syracuse where we were making great progress. I went from 3% in 1993 to 48% in the city council race in 2011. In the citywide races, we were getting 30 to 40%. The Republicans were far behind us. We were the opposition party in a city where the Democrats hold almost all the offices, except for the mayor right now, who's nominally an independent. He comes from a longstanding Republican family, and he got half the Democratic Party to support him. That's kind of an anomaly. But I got pulled, because I was doing well in these local races to run against Hillary Clinton in 2006, which, there were issues there. The war in Iraq, for example, at the top of the list, Medicare for all, and a Green New Deal. I mean, these are things that, needed to be raised. And then I ran for governor 3 times. It got us a ballot line. But unfortunately, not that many Greens made use of it at the local level. And then, people pulled me, drafted me to run for president. So I neglected the local organizing. And I think if I'd have, stayed at it, I'd have got on the city council. And this last congressional election, if I'd been on city council for several terms, this last one was between a far-right Republican and a center-right Democrat. And I think that would have been a good opportunity for a strong Green candidate. So, on my list of things to do is to begin rebuilding the Green local here in Syracuse. The lesson is you gotta tend to your locals, or there are always a few people that are kind of the glue and are responsible. And we lost that. I think the other thing was the larger climate, because we did lose people to DSA in particular because of the pull of Bernie Sanders and the push of the threat of Donald Trump. But the bigger problem was we didn't have people that kept up the local organizing. So that's the status here. And I think there are similar stories around the country. My argument is we got to put our buckets down where we are and build strong locals. Instead of electing hundreds to local office, we should be electing thousands. And that should be the foundation for then electing state legislators and then the House of Representatives. That's where the Greens will have leverage in national politics. We're not going to get it by running marginal races for president or these huge Senate races that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. The House is within our reach, and I think that's what our local organizing should have as the strategic objective. And as Salvador Allende said when he got elected, we have to make haste slowly. And I take that to mean we got to act fast, but we can't take a shortcut. We've got to build a local foundation. So when we are contesting federal races, in this case, the House is, I think, where we ought to focus, we have, a ground game, a local organization, a mass party behind those campaigns. So I think that's what we should be doing during the Trump period. David Sutliff Adius, Jay pointed out who the name was. And Dave is a great guy. He's a good candidate. And, look him up on your search engine and throw him a few dollars. Jay Walker, being pulled up to the state party or the national party is the death of the local party, at least in our Green Party of Pennsylvania experience. Yeah, I think, Jay, that's a problem we've got to address. The other thing goes on is people that aren't doing anything locally volunteer for state leadership and national leadership positions, and they don't have organizing experience. So, we have a party at the national level that is basically unfunded. $166,000 for an annual budget was just adopted for a national party that's trying to take on the two biggest capitalist parties in the world. It's just not serious. And then we're very fragmented, so we have a hard time coming up with a agreed upon national strategy. So it's pretty much every state party for itself. Some of them are better organized than others. And meanwhile, we've been hollowed out at the local level. I think one of the reasons the Greens persisted is that in the 80s and 90s, instead of like every other damn progressive, independent third party who tried to build a party out of a presidential campaign, we said we're going to go out and organize locals and then send delegates back to national congresses where we can work out a national program and hopefully strategy. Unfortunately, we went from the Federation of Locals to a Federation of State Parties where the locals were kind of hollowed out, and a lot of the state parties, really aren't more than a small group of people that got the franchise. So we've got to go back to local organizing. Has to be where we start. And then when we got that done, then we can talk about state and national politics. Yeah, I just see Jack saying he's had a problem in his county in California, and he mentions the Georgia party. And he acknowledges it could be worse. Yeah, I think it's an issue that we have to pay attention to and keep speaking about. And I have no doubt what you're saying is true. The trans issue, the Republicans have really pushed with a lot of, myths and fear mongering. And we got to counter that in our own ranks as well as in the public. So, but I still say the Greens on a whole have been much better than certainly the Democrats and a lot of parts of the left. Scout Trooper 164. Any thoughts on Germany no longer disclosing the shipments to Ukraine, considering Russia hacked security cameras? I don't know about the hacked security cameras, but Russia's intelligence services are very aggressive and sophisticated. So, we can assume that. I think they're not disclosing shipments to Ukraine as a military secret. And also, they may be shipping now the Taurus cruise missiles, which Russia takes, saying, "Oh, it's an accelerate. It's a big what do you call it? Escalation, and we might have to respond with nukes." So if they don't say it publicly, then Russia can't make such a big deal of it. Although if Russia finds them in Ukraine, they'll make a big deal of it. In any case, I think it's probably a matter of military strategy, so that it's harder for Russia to know what they're dealing with in terms of Germany's support for Ukraine militarily. So that's my thought on that question. Scout Trooper 164. Any thoughts on PBS suing the Trump administration? Would be nice, since MAGA is a bunch of dicks saying that PBS is leftist propaganda. Yeah, PBS is suing, I guess, for its very existence. I think their legal basis is Trump had no authority to defund them. And from what little I know about the law, I'm no lawyer, I think PBS's case is pretty good. Not that PBS is, leftist in the sense of anti-capitalist. They're liberal socially. Economically, they're pretty mainstream, Neoliberal. You don't find critiques of neoliberal economic policies on PBS for the most part. Or they're presented as, completely legitimate, like maybe a more liberal commentator. I don't watch PBS that much, but I imagine they've had people like Robert Reich on there. And, Reich is beyond the neoliberalism. He's more now of a New Deal liberal. And that's probably within the range of PBS discussion on economic issues. But they're hardly leftists in the sense that they present people that say we need structural change, economic democracy beyond capitalism. If that's been on PBS, let me know, but I haven't seen it or heard about it. Jay Walker, I've been listening to this show in podcast form, and I was wondering if there are outlines or notes. I think there's a lot of good content for green organizing, but it slips away while I listen. Well, like my presentation, I got notes from that. And, it's maybe we should post those notes. Boy, I've been doing this now for a long time. That's a job that may take some time to do, but yeah, I think it would be useful. I do send these notes to people who ask. So I like that suggestion, Jay, and I will talk to the people I'm working with. I will need help because I'm not. I wouldn't know how to get them in all the YouTube. I usually send people to the YouTube list of videos of Green Socialist Notes. And I do know that they have, actually, they should be transcribed now. I think YouTube does that as a matter of course, which in the early part of podcasts where I don't have a guest, I do make, some comments on the events of the day. So it may be there, or maybe you may be able to get it from there. And I'm not a good multitasker, but I'm gonna just see if I can check that out on the YouTube. Okay, looking at YouTube. Now, let me just click on last week's episode and see if there's a transcription. Maybe I'm confusing that with some of the podcasts on the podcast app. Let me try one other thing. I'm looking at Apple Podcasts because I know we're there, and see if I can find this. Well, I would suggest you look at one of the podcast platforms and see if they transcribe. It may be there, but that's a good idea, Jay. Jay Walker, how do you think GPS should focus more resources, capacity on congressional races? And he puts in parentheses the GCCC, the Green Congressional Campaign Committee, or focus more of them on local races? And that's the CCC, the Coordinated Campaign Committee. Frankly, I don't have much faith in either. They don't have much money. They do give little grants, and I mean little, that any serious local campaign can, raise on a good day. I think, Green should just focus on building their locals and running serious campaigns and building mass local parties. I mean, our goal is to win the majority of people in our communities to our position. And that means we got to go outside the usual circles, not just send an email to the list we got, but go out and canvass, deep canvassing that I've talked about, where you don't preach, you listen, you build relationships, and then you can talk politics and people know that you're concerned about what they're thinking. That's where I think, Green activists should be focusing their energy rather than trying to, form these national committees that then try to raise money and they get, $10,000 in a year. I mean, that's not even enough to run a serious city council race. And they're trying to spread that across the country. It just, maybe they're going to raise more money this year. I know there's, they're paying fundraisers, but I think what we should be sharing is what we're doing locally that's working. Canvassing, running candidates, where we have success, sharing it, making that an example that inspires others. I really think we got to focus locally and, compare notes in various, platforms where Greens are. But I think trying to get these national committees to the point where they could really help locals or congressional races, I think it's probably not the best use of our energy. Andrew Hager, back to Dr. Brainworm. In other words, JFK Jr. I saw a video about him blathering blatherskite claims about Bill Gates leveraging over World Health Organization. Sounds like a setup for an Abbott and Costello sketch to me. Robert Kennedy is a menace. And, one of the interesting things is there's a segment of people that used to support Greens that have gone over to the right over the vaccine question and, conspiracy, mindsets where instead of a structural analysis of the system and how it creates social problems, they tend to look for villains behind the scenes that are pulling the strings. And that's not how these problems are systemic and not just the result of a few bad people. The people, the capitalists, they're going to try to exploit workers and what's the phrase, they put the environmental costs onto the nature and the general public. And that's structurally defined by that role, or capitalism defines that role by its structure. So whoever's a capitalist is going to have to do that in order to make profits. And if they don't really do it, they're going to get replaced by the stockholders, the shareholders, the big shareholders. So we gotta look at the system, understand how it works, and talk about system change, not these crazy conspiracy fantasies. And then, so you've got people that are kind of, I don't know what, used to be hippies and now are right wingers. I mean, and Kennedy brought a lot of them into the MAGA movement, which is pretty disturbing, considering how racist the MAGA movement is. And a lot of these people aren't your old style Ku Klux Klan type racists, but they tolerate it. They're more concerned about vaccines. it's sad. Someone who's really tried to understand this is Naomi Klein. Her book Doppelganger, which I think is worth reading. She starts with how she's often confused with Naomi Wolf, who was a liberal feminist that has gone over to the far right, partly with this vaccine and conspiracy stuff, and is now a regular on Steve Bannon's podcast. And Naomi Klein is often confused with Naomi Wolf. And so, that's the starting point for her exploration of how people went from the progressive side to the far right. And, they went down these conspiracy rabbit holes mainly. And, understanding that and then how do we counter it is something I think we've got to address. And so I'd recommend that book for people that want to think about that question. Justice V. Encourage people, including David Miles Hogg, to join the Green Party of the United States. Yep, that's where they would politically be more at home. I think we're not going to be successful in that until we got a much stronger demonstration of our politics, which means, I think, electing thousands of people to local office in the next few years, and then some people to state legislatures, and finally the House of Representatives. And then to people like David Hogg or Rashida Tlaib, people like that, the Greens are going to look, like something, that's practical, can get results. Right now, Greens look marginal to these people, and we got to prove them wrong. And I think we do that by, doing what we've done. We've won 1,700 local elections since the Greens started. We have about 170 Greens in local office now, but we could multiply that into the thousands if we focused on it. I think that's what we got to do. And then the David Hoggs of the world will look at the Greens as their natural home. Charles Keener, democracy now is pretty progressive, like consistently anti-Zionist. Amazing in a way it is still on PBS. Is it on? I think it's on PBS stations, but it's a local decision. I don't think it's a corporate decision of national PBS, unless I'm wrong. So that depends on your local PBS station. Like we got one in Syracuse, and Democracy Now! Has never been on it, although we've asked. Andrew Hager, Vicky Corden, I'm not sure when I used Chat GPT, it couldn't help me come up with a strategy to stop the Trump administration. And I'm betting the same will happen with Perplexity. I assume Perplexity is another artificial intelligence thing. Yeah, well, artificial intelligence isn't that intelligent. So, that's a tough question. And anyway, I would be thinking for myself, not asking artificial intelligence to give me an answer. Jack Lucas. Patricia Krenwinkel, one of the Manson family killers, was approved for parole, though Newsom could block it. What do you think of releasing people from prisons guilty of particularly cruel crimes? Well, I think it depends on what we think they're going to do when they're out of prison. I mean, is this someone who has repented and feels sorry for what she did, and we have a reasonable expectation that she's going to be a law-abiding citizen? Our prison terms are much higher than they are in Western Europe, for example. And people there who do, cruel crimes, when they serve their sentence, get released, and they're shorter sentences, and they have very little recidivism from those, people. So, I haven't looked at her case. I don't know much about her. And, it's been almost 50 years since the Manson family murders. So, my inclination is she's probably not a danger to society now. She's elderly and Uh, but it depends on the case. I just don't know her case. Justice Fee. Andrew Hager seemed to be asking about the next pandemic, bird flu, etc. Okay, I might have missed that. I thought maybe he was talking about just HIV/AIDS. Yeah, with Kennedy in there, telling people not to get the measles vaccine when we have a epidemic of that spreading. Bird flu, it's being transmitted from animals, particularly cows on farms to people, creating a situation where it could mutate so it was transmittable between humans. And if it was easily transmittable, that would be a devastating epidemic because the people that do get bird flu have a high rate of mortality. And there are plenty of candidates for the next epidemic. And the Trump administration is gutting public health, in many ways, from research to delivery of public health services. So, yeah, I think, we're in danger of a pandemic that will be even less able to respond to than we were to COVID under Trump, which, Trump really botched that. I mean, he was crazy. First he denied it, then he said it was going to go away by itself. And he said, why can't we inject ourselves with bleach? I mean, he was just nuts on that. And now he's got a, vaccine denier in the, Department of Health and Human Services. It's a dangerous situation. So, yeah, Andrew, if you're talking about more than just HIV/AIDS, yeah, I think we're in a precarious situation. Question, what do you think about a general strike for Gaza? Well, it'd be good if we could pull it off, but I don't see how we could pull it off. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about a general strike from people that, they get online and say, let's start a general strike. They don't have any unions with them. You got to organize millions of workers to have a general strike that makes a difference. Now, if labor would get behind it, yeah, but labor seems to be ducking under Trump. But that's where you got to start. If we could pull it off, yeah. And, the Europeans, they have brief general strikes pretty frequently to make a point about various issues. And so, they should do it for Gaza for sure, and they have the capacity. I just don't see the capacity of any force in the United States to do it. Any force with the capacity like the labor movement to pull it off. And the labor movement, I mean, what could they pull off? They represent 6% of the private workforce at this point, 5.9% last year. When you add in public workers, it gets over 10%. That leaves 90% of workers out of the strike. And how do you pull them in when they have no union protection to defend them if they stay away from work, and the boss wants to fire them? So we have a lot of groundwork to do before we have the capacity to do a general strike in the United States. Now I could see a spontaneous general strike, something really outrageous to people, and it catches on. But that's not something we can organize. It's something that would just happen spontaneously. Like the George Floyd demonstrations. Those weren't general strikes, but they were massive. But because there wasn't any organizational infrastructure in the middle of that, what happened was the Democrats were able to tell people, well, you get back off the streets like you were this summer and, get Biden elected. And that'll solve things. And in fact, what did it do? Biden increased federal funding for police, didn't push hard on Justice Department interventions and set up, forget what they're called, reforms that police departments have to do in order to keep federal funding. And now Trump is tearing those that existed up. So that's the other thing. We got to have a mass party of the left with a clear idea of what it's doing. So when these movements break out, like it did for George Floyd, like it did for Occupy, the organization, the party can give it direction, not by giving it orders, but by saying, here's what we think we ought to do and getting the discussion going. And, we have a vacuum, not just politically on the left. The polling shows American voters are way to the left of the Democrats on economic issues and on social issues. And so that's a political vacuum that the Green Party should be filling. There's also a sociological vacuum in that up until 1970, America was particularly known for its voluntary organizations, its civic organizations. And that has been hollowed out since 1970, I think mainly because people, instead of going to local meetings of whether it's the PTA or their veterans organization or an environmental group, whatever it was, they go home and watch TV, and now they look at the screens on their smartphones. And so instead of talking to each other in local communities, we're getting one-way messaging through this, online media for the most part. It's somewhat interactive, but mainly, people are just receiving messages. And so instead of when we have movements, like during the Vietnam War, right up to the Iraq War, we would have coalitions of peace groups and anti-war groups come together and jointly map out strategy. Now it's all online, and the demonstration, the speakers, the demands are sent out to us by people who are staffed in nonprofit organizations. And that's not just the anti-war movement, it's the environmental movements across the board. It's very undemocratic, it's top down and very easily controlled by in this case, the liberal bourgeoisie who fund these nonprofits and want us to vote Democratic when elections come. So those are all reasons why the Green Party needs to fill not just a political vacuum, but that sociological vacuum. We should be a place where people want to go after work to learn about the issues and the system and strategies for making the changes we need, and just, to learn and to act. People join groups because they want to take action on issues and they want to learn about them. They don't want to sit through long, boring business meetings, which Greens tend to entrap new recruits in. That should be taken care of by elected officers, the routine business. Let them make the decisions, and if they screw up, hold them to account at the next mass membership meeting. Mass membership meetings should be mainly for education and getting people ready for actions and setting a basic policy for your local. So that's all to say. We need to organize. We're not ready to mobilize for Gaza. Carl Davidson, who goes back to SDS, I've known this guy forever. He just had a little comment. He said, this June 14th demonstrations are coming up. Indivisibles calling it Flag Day. Trump's going to have his military parade. That's another reason to be out on the streets. It's Bastille Day. There's a lot of, dates on June 14th. And he said, we should all be there. And then he said, if you just show up, you're an activist. But if you show up with a clipboard and literature, you're an organizer. That's what we need to be doing. When we go to these mass demonstrations, some Greens are saying, oh, indivisible, it's Democrats, and stay away from that. No, we should be talking to the people there because they're concerned not about indivisible's orientation to the Democratic Party. They're concerned about these issues that are outraging them. And so, come there and talk to people and, take names and follow up. That's the other thing. When we get names, we need to follow up. Otherwise, people don't think we care about what they think. So it's a long answer to the question about a general strike, but it's a question of organizing. Jack Lucas, any strong 2026 Green candidates you currently know of? Greens are excited for Butch Ware for governor and Sean Doherty for House of Representatives. Californians are excited. Yeah, Butch Ware is the one I'm hearing the most about. I get his fundraising messages. I think the ones coming from him are pretty much pitch perfect on the issues. I think he's doing a good job there. I wonder how much that's getting beyond these lists. I'm just not that close to it. I don't know if he's actually raising serious money and so forth. Sean Doherty's, I've heard about him. I don't know much about him. And as far as strong 2026 Green candidates that I know of, I don't know of any. I mean, I think Butch is probably the strongest. He's certainly getting most attention within Green circles. But I'm just, I've had a few people contact me. Some of them may come on the show and talk about their campaigns. But when I talk to them, man, they are, at the level of finding a treasurer and a campaign manager on the same page with them politically. It's, where are we now? They should be, going full gear by January. So they have time to get it together. But the other thing I question when they're talking about Congress is, what do you have locally in terms of an organization? Maybe you can use a congressional race to recruit people for a local that would then be serious about local races. I think that's conceivable. I had some success doing that in 2006 when we were having trouble in the post-Nader backlash and, just happened to be able and get in the debates with the incumbent who was a Republican and the Democrats who were pretty weak and make a good impression on people. So then when we came back locally, people were interested and we did well. So that's possible. But, then your objectives are, using the campaign to recruit and organize. And when I talk to people, a lot of them are acting like, well, they can win. And I just don't think they have a realistic sense of, their district and what it would take. So anyway, that's the best I can tell you, Jack. I don't know of any strong candidates. I hope there's some out there. I just don't know who they are. What do you think about a general strike for Gaza? I did answer that question. So, while that's still up, I see A. Jones 35. I roll on general strike, but can't even get a petition drive together. Yeah, that's where I think it's a good way of summing up, what I was saying. We gotta build our organization, and we got to be organizers, not just activists or mobilizers. We can mobilize, and we do mobilize for demonstrations, but then we go home. And now I've heard this about the demonstrations that Sanders and AOC are doing against, the oligarchy. I hear they're getting names online for people that RSVP, but they don't have people out there with clipboards getting names of those who didn't RSVP. I've heard mixed reports about that, but if that's what they're doing, then they're not organizers. I know Sanders has put some money into field organizers in some districts with I guess congressional races coming up. But that's sort of top down. It's not about building a party. It's about mobilizing for an election. And we need much more than that.